Steve Cole is a prolific and versatile writer for children and teenagers. His diverse body of work includes the uproarious Astrosaur series, crammed with groan-worthy puns, and the thrilling Young Bond series. He's also the editor of Doctor Who Publishing and writer of novels for the Doctor Who series. Today, he joins me in the Reading Corner to share his encyclopedic knowledge and to tell us about some recent and new projects. So can I call it an obsession?
Well, if you want it to be unkind. Yeah, I probably am slightly obsessed. The trouble is, there are so many people who are, so it kind of feeds that obsession.
I mean, what is amazing to me is if I were to talk about any episode from the long-running Doctor Who series, you would come up with the title, you would tell me what series it was in, what serial it was, and what episode it was.
It becomes almost like a dating mechanism. I know when Guy Fawkes' Night was, for example, in 1977 and 1978, because I know the episode of Doctor Who I missed to go and watch the firework display. I can tell you that I had my first hernia operation on the day that the Trial of a Time Lord Part 14, the final part, was broadcast. I remember watching it post-general anaesthetic in hospital. All significant dates up to 1989, when the original stopped, I can link back to events in my childhood. Missing episode 2 of Destiny of the Daleks because I was on a Cub Scout camp. Now that's tough. That's tough. The only other way you could enjoy Doctor Who was by reading the books, and that's why they became such a pivotal part of my childhood. So it was a very, very important part of getting me into reading, and it boosted my vocabulary no end in my English essays and story writing. I would freely borrow big words I'd learned from these Doctor Who books. And I remember being 8 years old and seeing the author of some of these books at Bedford Central Library. His name was Terence Dicks. And it was the first time I had that sense of, when I grow up, I want to be Terence Dicks. I want to do what he's doing. And when I became the BBC's Doctor Who project editor back in the 90s, 97, I think, the first author I got to work with was Terence Dicks on his book, The Eight Doctors. So I went from reading them to actually working with pretty much the guy who taught me how to read.
And I think such a good reminder to us as well about those connections between different media. Being a fan of television programmes doesn't mean that you won't also be a reader, and actually the connection can be made between the two. And just thinking about some of those writers over the full period of time, there have been those that have crossed both ways. So Terry Nation, who is a particular favourite, I think he was the one that first wrote the Daleks, wasn't he, into the first Doctor. And he wrote a fantastic children's book called Rebecca's World.
Yes, named after his daughter. Yes, lovely book. In fact, in the Doctor Who story I'm watching at the moment, The Planet of the Daleks, he also names a character Rebek there. So he was quite keen on slipping his daughter into Doctor Who stories.
Sometimes it's going the other way. So particularly recently, I think both Frank Cottrell Boyce, obviously Neil Gaiman, slightly different situation, but also Mallory Blackman have written for Doctor Who, haven't they?
Yes, and Mallory's been a fan for a long time. Penguin did a one short story per Doctor Who and got some fantastic people to do them. Philip Reeve and Charlie Higson and Patrick Ness. And Mallory did one. And the first page is it's just wonderful reading Mallory Blackman doing technobabble. It's got some fantastic stuff between the Doctor and Ace and the TARDIS. And of course, a lot of the TV Doctor Who writers, they were raised on these target Doctor Who books, much as I was. Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat, Gareth Roberts. They've all come to it through Doctor Who fandom to becoming, working on it professionally. So it's interesting how it exerts a hold over the creative imagination of some amazing people.
So tell us a little bit more about your role as your consultant editor, aren't you now, this is your kind of second round of working with the BBC on these. Is that right? Tell us a little bit about the history of that and what you do.
Well, back in 97, 98, 99, I was working for the BBC Worldwide, and I was their Doctor Who editor. I was meant to be project editor sci-fi titles, but in practice, that was Doctor Who. There wasn't much else going on in science fiction at that time. Red Dwarf, they tried to make me responsible for sometimes in terms of videos and audios and stuff, but there wasn't that much going on. It was Doctor Who was the big thing. And it was a huge amount of work because it was like 22 80,000 word novels publishing each year. Huge amount going on. I was pretty soon burnt out of the whole thing. But I kept my hand in by writing the occasional book for them. So when it came back in 2005, I was lucky enough to be asked to contribute a title. So I wrote one of the first Christopher Eccleston novels with the Slitheen. No one was expecting Doctor Who to be a success, really. There was a lot of doubt over it because it had ended up quite unpopular in television backwaters in the late 80s. There was suspicion that lightning would strike twice. Of course, Doctor Who delights in proving people wrong and being brave and forward-thinking enough to do things differently. So essentially reinvented Saturday evening as a family slot, and the publishing reflected that. We were very much aiming books at on more than one level. So I was, yes, contributing in my own way to that still, and still getting to write Doctor Who comic strips. And then a few years ago, I was asked if I would come back to oversee editorially some of the publishing going on. So I was, I found myself back on it. And it's one of those things that once you are back, it's very, you can't do it half-heartedly. You have to kind of, throw yourself back into it. And it was such an exciting time because it was just when Jodie Whittaker was coming on board as the female Doctor. So it was a chance to start a whole era afresh. So got Juno Dawson in to do one of the first novels, and Nina McCormack, who has done some fantastic writing work on other franchises like Star Trek. She's just had a Picard novel out. So it was very exciting again to be working with all sorts of different writers on all sorts of different projects, but also to do some of the old throwback Target publishing. The Target books were the novelizations of the TV stories of Doctor Who, and there were just a few that were outstanding that were never completed at the time. But last year we finished that whole collection by filling the last of the gaps, and next year, 2021 in spring, those paperbacks will appear, and they will be they'll just slot onto the shelf in we'll have a perfect run from 1963 to 1989 of all those Doctor Who's. Going forward as well, actually novelising some of the new episodes, the new series episodes as Target books. So in a way, it's passing on the torch to a new generation, as well as satisfying all the nostalgia in the 40, 50-something Doctor Who fans who were also reading back then.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you something now, because you mentioned Jodie Whittaker, the first female Doctor. You mentioned a female writer. Looking at the credit lists of the old TV series, very few female writers. What about with the books? Any female writers? Well, there's Jack Rayner that I know of.
Yeah, indeed. Yes.
Who else?
You had Sophie Aldred, who was a Doctor Who companion herself, did a hardback novel earlier this year. And we've had Joy Wilkinson, who wrote one of Jodie's first series. So it's been good to get the series has been much better at getting in a better mix of people. So I think the publishing has been reflecting that. When I came to commission the Target storybook, which was a lot of short stories across all eras of Doctor Who, half the writers were female, which I think was more than any previous Doctor Who publishing venture. So it's nice to keep pushing forward. Interestingly, when Doctor Who began, it was perhaps its most diverse. The very first director was an Anglo-Indian guy called Waris Hussain. The very first producer was the first female producer at the BBC, Verity Lambert. Okay. So you had very different attitudes to the patriarchal BBC hierarchy going on, which I think definitely resulted in Doctor Who being something so different. And recognising just the...
I wanted to ask you a question about writing for Doctors of the past and whether that presents any continuity issues. Do you have to give quite a detailed brief to the writers? Because you've got different writers writing about different Doctors. How do you keep that consistency?
Well, it varies, really. But a lot of the people, they know Doctor Who backwards and are aware of where it will fit in the continuity. If not, then it falls to me to suggest how we can mesh it in with the continuity. The wonderful thing is, Doctor Who fans love to argue about the minutiae in the same way that, fans of anything will argue about the smaller details or the best way of doing something. What's interesting is when you get writers like Neil Gaiman, who contributed a brand new story for the Doctor Who Adventures in Lockdown book that came out in support of children in need in November 2020. And Neil Gaiman is a fan of Doctor Who. Not only is he written for it on television, but he's slotted in this story. He knows his continuity. He knows this Sylvester McCoy 1988 Doctor Who story, and he's taken a key plot device of that and sort of like worked it in, finding new things to say and new things to do in a way that doesn't completely disrespect the past is what we're looking for.
And of course, that's not just about plot. And it's about tone as well, isn't it? Because there have been huge shifts in tone with Doctor Who over the years.
Indeed.
The extent to which it's light-hearted or serious, it does vary, doesn't it? Does that follow through in the writing of the books, or do they feel more as though they're one tone and voice in that respect?
It depends. You can change that tone for effect. Certain times in the series, yes, as you say, have led to different approaches. Different producers have come in, and messing that up really, and doing a very light-hearted story in a serious era, or a particularly serious story in a light-hearted era, is a way of just mixing things up, keeping them new. As long as you're true to the characters and how they would react in the situation, you can do anything. That's always been one of the strengths of Doctor Who. When you've got a blue box that can carry you anywhere in the universe at any point in time, it is impossible to run out of stories.
So let's talk about some of the up-to-date publishing projects that you've been working on, including your own book, of course. But let's start with the short story collection, the Lockdown one, which you've already mentioned. What's all that about?
Well, it's called Adventures in Lockdown. And during the lockdown, Chris Chibnall, the showrunner, put out a couple of short stories wanting to, entertain and distract people in troubled times, really. And this book gathers some of those stories. It also has news stories from Mark Gatiss, who, of course, has written many of the TV shows, as well as done a ton of things across all genres. And Vinny Patel, who has written a couple of the best received Jodie Whittaker stories as well. He did as a short story as well. But it also gathers up other TV writers to produce stories for it. So, it's a lovely collection. And, of course, a hefty chunk of the cover price goes to children in need. So it's been done for charity as well.
And then tell us, you've got a new book coming out, a David Tennant story.
Yes. There's a Doctor Who kind of mini-series called Time Lord Victorious, which takes the David Tennant Doctor just after a story called The Waters of Mars, which is a very scary story, where a base of human astronauts is nearly wiped out by these very scary alien water beings, the Flood. And the Doctor decides, he's fed up of people dying and not being able to do anything about it because of the laws of time. He thinks, I'll break the laws of time. I will save these people. It's like a slight hubris that comes with being the last of the Time Lords. He said, there's no one here to stop me. The laws of time are undone. I'm going to do this. You don't like it, deal with it. Then, of course, tragedy ensues in the wake of this. And this is right towards the end of David Tennant's time. He knows his time is limited. He knows he's going to die, regenerate. And in Time Lord Victorious, in my book, The Night, the Fool and the Dead, we see David Tennant's Doctor zipping off way, 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 way back in time, way further than they're meant to go, back to the dark times, ancient times, billions of years ago, to a time before death really got a grip on the universe. It turns out that in those days, people used to live forever, barring accidents. And then a race called the Coutura appear and decide that death is their gift to spread. They will decide the lifespans of other races, and so bring mortality to a universe. Well, the Doctor is at a point where he's at a fairly low ebb, and having come to this universe where life proliferates, he's slightly aggrieved that this is where it all begins. This is where the misery and sadness of death as a part of our life cycle comes in. If he can defeat these aliens who are bestowing lifespans, or maybe the universe will be a different thing. He won't have to spend his time battling to save people. So it's one of those times where the Doctor is tested. What he knows is right and what he knows he can do aren't always on the same page. So it's interesting to take the Doctor into a place that's quite dark for him, a time where he's actually trying to preserve life in the universe on a grander scale than he ever has before. So yes, writing The Night, the Fool and the Dead was my it was my first time writing for David Tennant's Doctor since 2009, I think. So it was quite fun going back 10 years later to a character that I'd enjoyed so much, his run on TV.
I love it when the Doctor's going through periods of angst. Those are my kind of favourite bits. And of course, you're a Spider-Man fan as well. We won't go there now, but the angst comes through in that.
Oh, yeah.
Which Doctor do you like writing about best?
The David Tennant one, definitely, because he's such a fun character to write for. He's so energetic, he's a real force of nature. He looks young, but he is old, and he has the weight of the universe on his shoulders, and that sometimes weighs pretty heavy. But also, I think it was such a wonderful time for Doctor Who with Russell T Davies in full swing, and the show had never been more popular.
So I was just going to ask you about the importance of the assistant and the relationship between the Doctor and the assistant, and how vital that is for the success of the series and the books, really.
It is vital to it because the companions are, in a way, our window into the Doctor. When it started off in 1963, the Doctor was a very remote old man, played by William Hartnell, and his companions were our points of view. There was a history teacher and a science teacher who could help the audience up to speed on some of the concepts in the stories that they would encounter, because there are a lot of historical stories that Doctor Who went through back then, where no science fiction elements at all beyond the time travellers themselves. And there was also the Doctor's own granddaughter, who was, we didn't know where they came from, who they were. They were aliens. So we needed those human perspectives. And as it's gone on, that has, increasingly become popular to the point where sometimes the companions have absolute equal billing or a greater starring role. I mean, we look at Sarah Jane Smith, who was the companion when I was growing up. And of course, she came back for the new series and then span off into her own set of adventures, the Sarah Jane Adventures. That wasn't even the first spin-off she'd done. In 1981, she did K9 and Company, where she was having adventures with K9, Doctor Who's robot dog. So, the companions have always been hugely important to that. In my The Night, the Fool and the Dead book, there's an interlude where the Doctor and his first companions come back, make their presence known. And it was, a real privilege to get to write this little scene from the point of view of Barbara White, the very first human companion to go into the TARDIS. They become part of the legend. And what's lovely about the world of books is, of course, you can get those characters and bring them back. Poor Jacqueline Hill, the actress who portrayed Barbara, died long, long ago, but her character can live on forever and find herself in new adventures, just as long as we keep making them and keep enjoying them and reading them.
Immortality.
Mortality.
A different kind. Can we talk about adversaries? What makes a good adversary, and do you have a favourite?
Well, it needs to be someone who can really represent the diametrically opposite point of view of the Doctor, which I think is why the Daleks and the Cybermen tend to be, amongst people's favourites, because a Dalek has an intense dislike for the unalike and will exterminate it, and the Doctor is someone committed to saving life. So straight away, there's a huge opposition there. With the Cybermen, their horror lies in the fact that they can't see their own horror. They see the emotions as a weakness to be removed, whereas for the Doctor, this is what life is all about. So again, you've got the big diametrically opposed views. The Cybermen represent everything the Doctor's travels tend to fight against: conformity and ruthlessness and the lack of emotion. So those are obviously the two big ones. I've got a soft spot for the mandrels, these kind of like these flared trousers swamp creatures from a story in late 1979. But I think no one else in the world has the same opinion of them as I do. So
Yeah, you and I did an event, didn't we? Probably about 7 or 8 years ago. It was a Doctor Who panel, which you chaired so brilliantly. One of the things at that event that just shines through is that people of all ages come along, and there's a kind of equalising between adults and child, which is so wonderful. And they're both in playful spirit. They're all getting dressed up. And so I wondered, whether your perspective as a child and an adult, whether it's changed in terms of what is now your favourite compared to what was your favourite as a child. So, for example, I know that as a child, my favourite episodes were the Yeti episodes in the London Underground, maybe because I lived in London, it was familiar to me, but I absolutely loved those. But as an adult, it's the trippy Patrick Troughton episodes called The Mind Robber. It's like unlike any other Doctor Who, actually. And I believe that the writer of those series didn't write anymore. He just wrote that.
Yeah, Peter Ling, the author of that, he actually created Crossroads and Compact, these very workaday sort of BBC soaps, well, ITV soaps. But what's interesting is that with soap operas, the characters often have a life of their own, and people will accost the actors in the street and berate them for what their characters have done. And I think it was that sense of how fictional characters can acquire a reality that inspired him to write The Mind Robber, which features the likes of Gulliver and
Rapunzel.
And Rapunzel, indeed, and D'Artagnan makes an appearance, and Cyrano de Bergerac, and all sorts of different fictional characters. We were pleased to hear that those Yeti episodes in the Underground, the Web of Fear, they're back. They exist again. They were rediscovered. There's only one missing episode from that story now, so you can.
The question is, will I appreciate them as much as I did when I was a child?
Well, this is it. The thing is, with Doctor Who, you can always see past the tattiness of the sets and the unconvincing effects to know what the intention was. You know what the production team were aiming for. And Doctor Who has always been a show where budget has never stood in the way of ambition. Even with some of the new series episodes that were being done, sort of 15 years ago, we look back now and we can see that the effects have dated even since then. They don't look so convincing. At the time, it was like, wow, Doctor Who has never seen anything like this before, but now we accept, it looks a bit ropey. That's just the nature of things. But I think the stories themselves are what stand up. And there's one notorious story for Doctor Who from around 1978 called Underworld, which draws heavily on Greek myth. They had no money, so they couldn't afford to build any caves. So they basically used green screen to sort of slot in caption slides of caves in the background. And everyone's just running around, and half of them, their arms and their legs are disappearing as they catch the wrong bit of light and they're standing in the wrong place. And, it's dismal as a visual experience. But the story itself is sound and fun and has all sorts of interesting angles. Is made additionally rich by the introduction of these mythical overtones from Greece. You've got some very clever allegory going on. So I think you can always see past what ended up on screen and enjoy it. In fact, while Underworld is decried by fans, the general public stuck with all 4 episodes, and it got 10, 11 million people watching it. So they weren't put off in the way that the fans are. Possibly they think that's what Doctor Who is always like. So there's always been the big joke about the unspecial special effects and the silliness of it all, which you can sort of laugh at to a degree. But you always remember that they were setting out to make not a children's show, but a family show. It was always made by the drama department, never by the children's department. It has to appeal to children to survive. Why wouldn't you want to appeal to children? They're the best audience. They're the ones whose imaginations need the most stimulating. And I think as long as we have some of that child inside ourselves, there's always a place for Doctor Who, and I'll never be able to watch it and be left cold or left untouched. You'll always be thinking, yeah, that was scary, or that was thrilling, or that was funny, and laughing with it rather than at it, I think.
What a fabulous stopping point that is, Steve. It's eternal, and we'll be forever laughing with it.
Yes.
At it. And being scared by it too.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for talking to me in the Reading Corner today about all things to do with the Doctor.
My pleasure, Nikki, my pleasure.